I'm gonna ask how some of the projects came to be or came to you, or how you got involved in them. And I know this is different for all of you. So Arturo, in terms of The Jar Boy, I know there's a bit of a fun story about why you chose that particular play to adapt, because as you said, you had come from documentary filmmaking.
Yeah.
And so to step into your first feature, narrative feature in this way, how can you share with us that story?
Sure.
I find it delightful.
Sure. Well, my partner is a theater actor, and she writes and directs also. And one day we were going to a party and we said, why don't we make a project together? You come from theater, you know actors, you know plays, and I come from the documentary world, which you know a bit of the production of making a film. So we decided that we would make a movie based on a play, because locations are limited. Plays are usually written for 3 or 4 stages.
Mm-hmm.
It's all indoors, so you don't have to worry about big production. It was all like, this is amazing. It's usually 3 or 4 characters. So since we were aiming to shoot a very low budget movie, the play was fantastic.
Right.
And if we choose a screenplay that is already been proven, it's up to you to screw it up, really, because it's there, right?
All right.
So we posted on Facebook, what is your favorite Canadian play? And everybody started going, and you know, people like to contribute.
Yes.
And we ended up with The Jar Boy winning, and we read like 3 or 4 of the finalists, and I've never seen or read The Jar Boy, and I loved it because of my background as a documentary filmmaker. For those who haven't seen the play or don't know, Miles, the young character that arrives at the farm, he's a writer collecting stories to write a play about the stories he's collecting. So basically he's a documentary filmmaker without a camera. And the whole drama and the whole themes are about truth, and when truth is represented, does it stop being truth, which is topics that we deal with when we make documentaries all the time.
Right. Yeah, I love that story.
Oh.
The process of it. I heard
The
it once, and
Facebook
I
part,
thought the
or-
Facebook part,
Oh, okay. I
and
didn't know
the
exactly what
documentary,
part. Oh.
and the documentary angle.
Right.
Well, because I think that's so interesting in terms of like what goes into adapting something from one form to another. And I
Yeah.
find your insight. I mean, I knew that play, but I'd never thought about it in those terms.
Right.
And I think that speaks to you as a writer, because it is writing. You know.
Right.
Linwood, I want to talk to you about Never Saw It Coming, because there's a project where you had written this, highly successful novel. And so how did it come to pass that you made it into a screenplay?
Well, it was kind of funny. We had, my wife and I bought a getaway place in Prince Edward County in Ontario. And we had someone who I had worked with at the Toronto Star years ago, a woman named Gail Harvey, also has a place there. And Gail and I had worked together at Star when I was an editor there, and she was a photographer. And in the time that all these years since we'd sort of gone our separate ways, she'd become a very accomplished director, film and a lot of television, and a documentary on Ricky Lee Jones and so forth. So we got, we reconnected, and over dinner one night, she said, do you have some book that has not been optioned or something? And I said, I've got this shorter novel that's almost like a Coen Brothers thing in a way. And so I gave her that to read, and she loved it. She said, would you be willing to write a screenplay for it, adapt your own book, and basically on spec while I go hunting for money, she says. And I said, sure. So it was great. And I can't imagine I'll ever have this kind of process again that goes so well, because, there was really not a lot of people involved. It was Gail, there was me, there was, some people looking for funding and a producer and so forth. But I wrote that, and I wrote the screenplay in 9 days, and it was interesting. I think and of course I have the advantage of the fact that I'm familiar with the source material. Right. I wrote the book, and so it's not like I have to think, well, how would the author of this want this to be interpreted? Well, that part was okay, and so I did a screenplay of it in 9 days. And the other thing that I guess made that easier, knowing the story, is that at some point I kind of just threw the book away, because I thought, I know the story, and if I try to go through the book and think, well, I need to get this scene, or how do I adapt that page of dialogue, and I finally went, and I kind of stopped looking at it, because I thought, well, I know the story, I know what the essence of it is. Let's tell that story in this different kind of form. And so, and I think there was about a day's worth of tweaks on it. You know, Dale said, I think we should do this and that, and off it went.
Wow.
And any experience that I've had since then in doing that kind of work has not been that way. You know, there's only about 75 people who want to weigh in with their suggestions.
Right.
Oh, please, can I have another? You know. So that's how that came about, and against, I think, sort of extraordinary odds, the movie got made. Gail found the money. We got Emily Hampshire and Eric Roberts to be in it, and it all got shot up in Sudbury, and it was a great experience. You know, it's a very modest budget, but I'm really proud of it. I think it's a nice little thriller.
Mm-hmm. And so, in that process of sort of throwing away the book at a certain point, how much then did the screenplay differ from the book, or did you find suddenly that you could explore new things inside of that world that you hadn't explored in the book?
It's actually, that particular screenplay is pretty close to the book. Okay. You know, it's kind of, you kind of take the book and it's like you're panning for gold or whatever. You kind of sift through and you get it down to its essence and tell that story. And so it's not too different. I mean, more recently I've been involved in an adaptation of a trilogy of books I wrote that I call the Promise Falls Trilogy. And in the process so far, we're making tremendous amount of changes, but I'm involved and I'm kind of okay with that, because what I'm finding is maybe we should do it this way or that way. And I'm thinking, if I had thought of this particular thing to do with the story when I was writing the books, I would have done that. And so if it gets made into a series, this is an opportunity to take sort of that jumping off point that the books were and do things that are even more interesting. So I don't feel it's sacred. You know, I think if we can take this idea and build on it and do something different, then I'm okay with that.
And so, Susan, you've worked on several projects that are based on or adapted from books. Most recently, you worked on The Man Who Invented Christmas, which was based on the book of the same name by Les Standiford. So how did that come to be? And did you seek that out, or did they seek you out, or how did that come to happen?
They came to me. I'm still not quite sure how they found me. And it's an unusual one in that it's a nonfiction book that I turned into a pretty highly fictionalized. It's very much based on the real story of how Dickens wrote A Christmas Carol in 6 weeks.
Right.
But it's not very dramatic, even to other writers, to watch people writing the whole time. It's always that challenge of finding a way to make the internal external. So at some point, I had the idea of the characters coming to life. And because actually, a lot of it, it's a weird thing, because a lot of it's actually based on truth. He was the kind of writer who really did kind of see his characters and interact with them, and he was sort of a failed actor. So that gave me the idea that this was fair game in a way. It had some basis in how he actually thought. So it was a long, and there were, I lost count of how many drafts, probably 20.
Right.
At one point we thought, because we were having trouble, we got stars, they left, you know, they got bigger jobs, we thought, could it be a musical? You know, everything to try and find a way to tell the story, and somehow it all came around in the end. But.
Right. So in a similar way to speaking with Arturo, it's sort of like you were adapting the book, but also sort of taking into account him as a figure, Dickens as a figure.
Yeah,
and
I was
sort of
really just grabbing stuff. I mean, I did, because I do love research, I read millions of books about the Victorians and Dickens, and sort of pillaged his novels for his best lines of dialogue. I'm shameless about stealing stuff that I thought would be good for this particular sort of story, which is a little bit tongue-in-cheek, but also I really wanted it to be well-researched and actually grounded in the world, proper world. So it was a hybrid in that way. But,
right. And how do you start that process? Like when you're approaching, that you're adapting this book, because I'm sure every writer has a different approach to this, but I'm always so curious about, what is that first step? Do you work from an outline? How much does it differ from if you were just writing something not based on another piece of source material? Like, what's your first step there?
An outline, a kind of prose outline, just so you can feel what it feels like, is how I usually start. Because you could get, well, for one thing, you can, if you're adapting something that's already existing as a novel, you can fall in love with all the details, but you really have to find the story. And that's the first job that I find, this, like, where, not just the plot, but where's the emotional through line is really what you're looking for. So where is this character, where do they start from, and who are they going to be at the end of this, and how are they going to get there? Kind of, those kinds of character-based, for me, always very character-based questions.
And how about for you, Arturo? What was your first step in moving from the play into the screenplay?
I did some research, basically watched a bunch of movies that had been plays that were made into films. And the one thing that I found in every one of them, even the ones that are amazing, was that at some point I would start getting claustrophobic. I would start being like, I want to see the air, I want to see the sky, I want to be outside. A lot of these movies happened within an apartment, in a theater, and then they stay there. So that was kind of like one of the changes that I wanted to do. I read 1,000 times the script, and it's like, what scene can we get outside? What scene can we get rid of? What scene can be cut into and made it in a moving, instead of talking at the table, actually what's going to motivate them to walk to the barn and actually have that dialogue. So you would physically feel the air and the sky and the sun, that's what it sounds a little insignificant, but it's quite important, I think, to avoid that claustrophobic element.
And Linwood, did you find any freedom in, or what attracted you to the format of film?
I loved the whole notion of writing a screenplay. I mean, when you write a novel, I mean, you feel, there's backstory, and there's inner dialogues, and there's, 3 pages of what someone's thinking before they make a decision. And when it came to a screenplay, I thought, I don't need any of that. I can just get rid of all of it. And it just kind of was, I thought it was kind of liberating. It's like, I don't have to give you everything. I don't have to tell you every single thing. I have to try to, through actions and words, communicate as much as I can in a kind of a shorthand way. So in a lot of ways, I mean, you can kind of blather on forever in a novel. I learned very quickly that in a screenplay, you have to be able to justify every single word. Every single line, there has to be a reason for it. It has to contribute in some kind of way. And it needs to impart information or what the character's like or something. And so, but I liked that. I thought that was really it was kind of liberating. I didn't have to give you all this other stuff. I just have to give you what matters. And I think that's what I really liked about doing it.
You didn't mind, because I think novelists sometimes have trouble with, like, oh my God, I have to do all the exposition and the dialogue. That didn't bother you?
The dialogue?
Yeah.
Well, see,
everything has to. We have to find out what we need to know about the characters through the.
Well, the thing is that part was, for me, wasn't as difficult because my own novels are pretty dialogue heavy. I mean, if I could just write novels that were almost entirely dialogue, I'd be happier anyway. So the writing of a screenplay was really a joy in that sense. I mean, there's nothing I hate having to write more than long-winded paragraphs of description. I hate that stuff. I love people like Elmore Leonard, who would say before, God bless him, he was such a great writer, he'd say, I don't write the stuff that people skip anyway. That paragraph is the detectives driving up the laneway to the house and they describe the gardens and the house. I don't care. Then you get to the part where you meet the guy who's hiring the detective and then you read the dialogue and you get into it. Right. So I'm happy to leave out all that other stuff and let an art director and a director have to figure out what we'll see. So I think that part of it I just loved.
Yeah. Was there anything that you were sad to not include in the screenplay that was in the book? Were there any moments of longing for...
No, at least not in that. There's another project I worked on for about 6 months based on another one of my books. There was a lot to try to pack into, say, a 45 or 50-minute episode that you think, oh, I'm going to have to lose this or I'm going to have to lose that. but not so much. And it's funny, when we did the movie Never Saw It Coming, there's a scene right near the end where Emily Hampshire's character says something to this low-life boyfriend, and while she's doing something rather terrible to him. And I had written all this dialogue for it. And Gail got in touch and she said, Emily, the actress, said, I don't think I need to say anything, because when you see it, you realize it doesn't need any words. And I said, she's right. So let's get rid of it. And I think that's the other thing sometimes you forget when you're actually writing a screenplay. You think you need all those words, and you're forgetting that people are going to see images. They're going to see stuff.
Right.
And Emily Hampshire was right. We didn't need any dialogue then.